Permaculture and urbanism are two great movements that need to get together. In today's episode, I'll walk you through what permaculture and urbanism are, why they don't get along, why and how they're actually aligned, and why and how they must merge. Welcome to Edenicity, best practices for sustainably abundant cities. All right, permaculture is an ecological design system to meet human needs, such as water, food, fiber, and shelter, as well as energy, while healing the earth. In a permaculture design, it's not sufficient just to meet our needs without doing harm. We must actually repair the ecosystems around us. Permaculture is founded on three ethics. Earth care, the idea that we must use the land in such a way that all life benefits, not just humans. Second is people care, meeting our needs with minimal waste and work, and helping others learn how to do the same. And finally, fair share. This is the ethic that is most misunderstood. The basic idea is that we should make sharing easy and that all surplus should go back to ethics 1 and 2. So just to be clear, no billionaires allowed. I think a lot of people are really surprised to discover that there's over 1 million certified permaculture designers worldwide, designing homes, farms, and actively involved in humanitarian aid. Okay, what is urbanism? I think like permaculture, many of us know it when we see it, but have a hard time defining it. In a nutshell, urbanism is a planning strategy to make cities more livable. It does this by integrating large systems such as housing, transportation, utilities, commerce, and recreation. Urbanism brings these systems together to create compact, walkable, multifamily, mixed-use, mixed-income, transit-oriented towns and cities. And I can't emphasize this enough. Individually and together, these promote social and economic opportunities, as well as health and safety. They take the things that cities are already very good at and make them much, much better. So given that, the question is, does permaculture embrace urbanism? In a word, no. On page 531 of his Permaculture Designer's Manual, permaculture founder Bill Mollison lists cities as mainly disorganized on every level, effective anarchy and crime, and social isolation in many areas. Throughout his career, Mollison had few, if any, positive things to say about cities. He saw them as basically a failed experiment. For those not involved in permaculture, it can be hard to appreciate just how low an opinion most permaculturists have of cities. My first instructors in permaculture literally sneered at and chewed out students who asked the question, how would permaculture work in a rental environment? They basically said, if you're not using it in a homesteading environment, if you're not getting on some land and rebuilding the land, what's the point? But as I've shown in several recent episodes, apartment eco-villages have shown an amazing capacity to affect change in ways that other models have not over the past 4+ decades. Now, there are exceptions that I've covered in the past, such as village homes in Davis, California, which beautifully merged some elements of urbanism and permaculture. But up till now, permaculture has largely abandoned the city, except on the occasional single-family lot. Okay, then what about urbanism? Does it embrace permaculture? Amazingly enough, as far as I could tell, urbanism seems largely unaware of permaculture. This has really surprised me over the years. When I talk with urbanists, city planners, architects, landscape architects, I find that they have very little understanding of permaculture. They've basically heard about it, maybe seen a book about it somewhere, but have very little idea what it's about. Which is a shame because, from an urbanist perspective, permaculture has a lot to offer because of how deep it goes into the ecological design that one sometimes encounters in landscape architecture and in urban planning. Now, permaculture and urbanism are aligned in that they both abhor wasteful or destructive land use. Permaculture, for example, detests monoculture, where you have just one crop between earth and sky from horizon to horizon, which has its equivalent in urbanism in the form of sprawl, with cookie-cutter houses and endless roadways cutting people off from each other. Permaculture does everything it can to avoid bare soils. Urbanism considers things like parking lots and stroads, which are streets that are basically highways in disguise, to be a complete failure of design. In permaculture, we look to find alternatives to overgrazing. Urbanism tries to find alternatives to single-use zoning. Permaculture avoids clear-cutting. Urbanism cautions against demolishing walkable places. In permaculture, we grow food crops without petrochemical fertilizers and pesticides, and urbanism strives to build cities where you can get around without a car and grow up that much freer. In permaculture, we try to avoid garden situations where we're just constantly resetting the natural progression of landscapes from the very simple with just a few organisms to more complex with a lot more organisms interacting in much richer ways. And urbanism tries to build in ways that last rather than having endless streets and utilities and throwaway construction that we have to dig up or replace every few years. Of course, we try to reverse desertification in permaculture, and in urbanism, we try to reverse urban decay and blight. Permaculture does not ignore microclimate, but puts it to use. Urbanism does not ignore local context, but makes that the center focus of a good design. In permaculture, we do not bulldoze wilderness. In urbanism, we don't junk up our cities with investment condos that sit vacant, as they do in London and in New York's Billionaire Row, and even in Honolulu. In permaculture, we don't drain wetlands. In urbanism, we don't pave creeks and rivers. But permaculture and urbanism are also aligned in some positive ways. Both of them use design to create abundance through sharing. It's such an important message in this hyper-competitive, consumeristic day and age. In permaculture, we stack functions. So a tree, for example, provides shade, food, lumber, habitat, cooling, flood and drought mitigation. A tree, like everything else in permaculture, is not there just to do one thing. And we look to do this with plantings, dwellings, built objects. Everything we do in the landscape is doing multiple jobs at once. Similarly, in urbanism, we multiply the value of landscapes by packing in mixed uses. In a mixed-use development, you can have your home and within easy walking distance, shopping, schools, clinics, and meet most of your daily needs. In permaculture, we have interactive diversity. For example, a coffee bush will give you a higher yield if you have it in the open sun in a plantation, but then you have to irrigate and fertilize it, and it's not going to live nearly as long as if you put it in an environment that's closer to its natural environment, in the understory, where it's shaded by many taller trees. It's irrigated for free by the condensation drip off the leaves of the overstory at night, and it's fertilized by the natural humus building process in the forest floor. In such an environment, it lives longer, it thrives, it does not yield as many coffee beans, but when we combine the coffee yield with the yield from all of the other trees that are stacked vertically above it, the yields can be many times more, both in terms of raw weight and economic value, than growing coffee in the open field. And in urbanism, we have social and economic diversity, which build resilience and safety, because no matter what walk of life you're from, the people that you need are never that far away. In permaculture, we design in zones based on how much interaction we have with the landscape, with the most intensive zones closest to where we live. In urbanism, we have transit-oriented development around transit hubs. Permaculture makes use of the edge effect, where multiple environments come together. I finally got around to reading Braiding Sweetgrass, and there's a chapter where she describes an environment in the Pacific Northwest where first people maintained a meadow at the forest's edge at the seashore to bring three environments together for an enhanced level of biodiversity in that area. In permaculture, we design many borders, for example, ponds, fences, and garden paths, to maximize the edge between one environment and another. Urbanism also has an edge effect in the form of activated street edges, where, for example, you might find a sidewalk cafe or a front porch that creates a softer gradation between the public and the private spheres of life. In permaculture, we observe and interact with the natural phenomena around us to improve our designs. In urbanism, we have participatory planning, with all stakeholders present or at least well represented. Permaculture designs systems so that waste equals resource, and more urbanism is headed in a zero-waste, circular economy direction. Permaculture has pattern understanding, which goes way beyond biomimicry, where you're just imitating patterns that you see in nature. Pattern languages are at the heart of both permaculture and increasingly urbanist design. We want to be able to easily describe the geometric strategies that you're using, whether it's transit-oriented design or swales on contour. Permaculture has ecological succession, where we plant, usually at much higher than agricultural density, the pioneer species that will prepare soils for later perennial crops. And urbanism looks toward infill planning and densification strategies to increase the livability and value of a city. There are many more possible examples, but I'll leave you with just this last one. Permaculture strives for appropriate scale. You don't want to have giant farms with waves of a single grain from horizon to horizon, but instead we tend to work in much smaller chunks that make best use of the peculiar opportunities that we find in the natural variations in a landscape. And of course, urbanism strives to do the same thing with human scale development, rather than finding ourselves lost in a massive maze of imposing buildings. With so much in common, there's already reason enough for permaculture and urbanism to merge. But here are two reasons why they absolutely must. The first is land use. We occupy half the land on Earth. We've wiped out half the life. Meanwhile, 55% of us live in cities on just 3% of the total land area. And the world is urbanizing fast. According to the United Nations, the world's urban population is growing by about 200,000 people a day from now through 2050, mostly through migration. So the grand challenge of the century is to figure out how to live in cities in such a way that we increase rather than decrease living biomass and increase rather than decrease biodiversity. How do we do that? Well, as just a quick kind of conceptual example, I've put together a diagram of how permaculture and urbanism might merge to bring more life to a city. So in this slide, we have problems in white, permaculture upgrades in green, and urbanist upgrades in yellow. And as you can see, these play very well together. Storm drains become rain gardens or creek beds. Flood-prone areas become water-absorbing landscapes. Highway expansion turns into highway removal, creating lots of space for said water-absorbing landscapes, as well as green mobility corridors. These might be, for example, bike paths along a waterway, as Houston has done with the Bayou Greenways initiative. We go from car-dependent sprawl to transit-oriented development, which provides a lot more health, safety, and equity. Let me define that in terms of safety. Public transit in environments that have to interact with cars can still be up to 50 times safer per passenger per mile than car-based solutions. In areas where they don't have to interact with cars, they can be hundreds to thousands of times safer. We go from lawns to food gardens, which again contributes to health. We also go from food deserts to food gardens, as well as green roofs and food forests. We take organic waste and compost it properly on site so that people know what's going into it. And again, that can contribute to things like food forests. We go from detached houses to multifamily development, then add green roofs to reverse the heat island effect that cities are prone to. Multifamily development is basically apartments that converts to eco-villages, as we saw in Kailash. Multifamily apartments, eco-villages, transit-oriented design all play well with mixed uses, which multiplies the value of any acre or hectare of land. Together, all of these activities vastly reduce our demand for agricultural products, energy, and mineral resources from the greater environment, which then makes physical room to restore watersheds and reforest. And these activities, I believe, are integral to restoring indigenous lifeways beyond the city. And again, this is just a quick example. Many more combined permaculture and urbanist upgrades are possible in cities. And the more we link them together, the more valuable they can become. Okay, here are a couple related videos. And since you're still here, would you do me a favor and think about who you might like to see speak at a permaculture urbanism conference? No promises, but I'd love to put one together sometime in the coming months. And finally, as always, thank you so much to the patrons for supporting this work. Take care, stay green, see you next time.